patreon.com Kingscrusher. Good evening all to you, and Happy New Year to everyone on the chess-based server so far. There's a few of you there, and there's a few of you already on livestream. Hi there. So livestream.com/Kingscrusher. So basically I thought Geller was a great player to have a look at. He's featured in Fischer's 60 Memorable Games book, and is one of the only opponents that beat Fischer. So Fischer did include some losses in that book. Geller has a plus record against Fischer. I've got some information from chessgames.com about Geller. Basically I can read out to you. So chessgames.com have a short bio. Born 1925, died 1998. Efim Petrovich Geller was born in Ukraine. He learned to play chess as a young man, arrived in the international scene by qualifying as a world championship candidate in 1952, earning the GM title in the process. So the Grandmaster title, before the FIDE ratings, this is 1952. FIDE ratings were around 1972. So throughout his career, he appeared in the candidates 5 more times and competed in a record 23 Soviet championships, winning 2 in 1955 and 1979. That's quite a gap, isn't it? Winning 2. One was in 1955 and the other in 1979. That's quite a gap for winning. I think one was a senior championship, the 1979 one. His aggressive playing style and expertise in double-edged positions culminated in a positive score against no fewer than 5 world champions over the course of his career. So Max Over, Mikhail Botvinnik, Vasily Smyslov, Tigran Petrosian and Fischer. So those were positive scores. He also scored victories against Spassky, Tal and Karpov, so bringing his total of world champions beaten to 8, a record shared only with Botvinnik, Petrosian and Korchnoi. Okay, so this game we're going to have a look at some classic Geller games, and I've chosen actually some games which you'll find on the wiki page. I thought we could go over them. They've been selected for special interest. So the first game, Alexander Kotov as white, who many of you know from my YouTube channel. I don't really like his view of chess as game analysis trees. I just think that's the way computers work. So Kotov, the great analyst, supposedly playing white. Okay, so in this game as black we have a kind of early King's Indian, and we're going to see some of the dynamic aspects of the King's Indian, in particular the d6 pawn. So being used as a sort of dynamic bait. So as white, Kotov playing white, he played d4. So we get a King's Indian defence. So the King's Indian in 1949, of course not as heavily analysed, but it was a safe option back then as well as today, just to fianchetto the bishop, g3. So the normal King's Indian attacks for the normal King's Indian player to relish, like with f5, f4 later, are less likely to work against a fianchetto system. So after d6, interestingly, after knight f3, in a normal main line you might consider the moves e5 and knight c6 to encourage d5, then go back. But here, different strategy altogether, knight bd7. So the idea is basically to play on the dark squares, particularly c5. If you can encourage white to play d5, you'll get the c5 square. With that you can play a5 maybe. Or even if you can get c5 from another means, say e5 and takes, you'll be knocking out d4 and you can use the c5 square. So that's one of the key strategies which I think knight bd7 is invoking and implying that that's going to be the main strategy used for the game. Dark square campaign, in particular c5, is going to be used. Off the castles we see that campaign now with e5. So does white play d5 or leave the pawn? c5 is going to be a focus strategically to try and conquer here. e4 was played. Okay, it blocks in the bishop temporarily a little bit, but it does provide more support for d5 control. It invites black to release the central tension, But one aspect of white's thinking is usually d6 is going to be more vulnerable. Okay. So e takes d4, knight takes d4. Now here, actually, while we're on the subject, if you play a5 here, I remember as a junior John Nunn, who's a King's Indian guru, saying this was a major strategic mistake against Victor Korchnoi. All Korchnoi did was knight b5, and then you're dead really strategically, because you can never play c6. That would be a huge strategic mistake. He managed to win these 2 games against Korchnoi, and there was tons of computer analysis. He showed all of us, we were juniors. I was really impressed. So anyway, that's a kind of strategic mistake based on d6. So really, you can't play a5 here because of knight b5. So actually, knight c5 was played, and okay, there's pressure on e4. It can be built up on to get more pressure on e4. a5 would secure the knight against b4s later. Right. f3 was played here, which seems to have a few side effects. It's blocking in the bishop even more. This diagonal might be more sensitive in the future. Note also this bishop is not supporting c4. If black can gain the c4 pawn, that might be interesting. Okay, knight fd7, as though c4 might be a target actually because of knight e5 and knight b6 potentially. This c4 pawn is a bit vulnerable with the bishop over here, not on this diagonal, supporting that c4 pawn. Bishop e3, and now we have it. Dynamism in the King's Indian in this line often involves seemingly crazily putting your d6 pawn at even more risk, and this move is typical of a King's Indian played very dynamically. c6, because we've got a pawn on a seemingly semi-open file. Why would you want to play c6? Isn't this pawn actually vulnerable? Bronstein in his Annotations of Zurich tournament talks about this a lot, this d6 pawn. It's not so easily to get at. It's one of those cases of a weakness being more of a weakness in a theoretical sense than an exploitable weakness. However, it does provide seemingly formal logic for the next move, queen d2, which would seem not only to sort of try and weaken black on the dark squares, but also maybe just build up on d6 and then maybe just retreat the knight and try and win it. a5, so rook ad1 looks logical. So I guess how many of you are really terrified of having this d6 weakness? Could I ask you? This is at the root of King's Indian dynamism. If you believe it or not, or if you think computers would rule this out, what do you think about d6 here? Is it a theoretical weakness or is it exploitable weakness? How would you vote? That's the question then. I'll pose that to you. Do you think this is an exploitable weakness or a theoretical weakness? Anyone? Any King's Indian players here? So Benko Gambit, you've written, instead of f3 by white, is bishop g5 to provoke h6 and bishop back to e3 an idea? Probably. But it seems, white's trying to sort of say that black's trump card of this pressure is not worth anything. Once you play f3, that pressure, is it worth anything? Whilst this pressure, is it worth something? White's trying to say the pressure on d6 is worth more than the pressure on e4. So playing f3, okay. It makes sure e4 isn't a problem. Okay. So knight e5 was played here anyway. Okay, we're going to see now. So it's striking at the c4 pawn. White has to defend c4. White plays b3. And now, actually, a4. Why not? a4. Well, you might ask, well, hang on, b4, doesn't that chase this beautiful knight back? Actually, that wasn't played. It would weaken c4 actually. b4 knight takes c4 actually. That's not a good idea. Whoops. Knight de2 was played. So we're striking at this d6 pawn straight away. But isn't b3 now on? A takes b3. b3 is on. But hang on, even worse, you might wonder. Bishop takes c5. Isn't this just winning a whole piece? Whoops. A whole piece. Blunder, you might think. Blunder. No, this was intentional, I think. It was intentional. Okay, the d-file is pretty dangerous for white. as this seems to show. Has black just blundered the piece? Well, he takes on c4 now with his knight, so he's got 2 pawns now. And he's attacking the queen. And he's protecting that d6 pawn, of course, at the moment. The queen moves to c1. And now he gets 3 pawns for the piece. 3 pawns for the piece. And he's threatening to queen the pawn. So white has to do something about the pawn now. So he takes the pawn. Okay, still, black has lost a piece. But look, we've got something over here. We've got 2 connected passed pawns, which clearly could be devastating for white in the long run. I'm being a bit jokey there, but there is 2 connected passed pawns there for the piece. Queen a5 strikes at 2 pieces now. So he's going to be a piece down, though. Queen takes c4 because he's losing another piece. He's 2 pieces down now. So 2 pieces down, but he's got these pawns here, which clearly have a lust to expand. Right? He's 2 pieces down though. So bishop e6 skewing quite beautifully anyway, the queen and knight, getting one of the pieces back in style. So queen c1. So which one to take? Of course he doesn't want to lose d6 if it can be used to take like this. So d takes looks like the better bet. So what do we have here? We have a stumbling knight on a2 which has to be moved. Clearly it moves. And now the pawns can be pushed. b5. So look at these pawns. And there is a reserve pawn here. Even if we lose this reserve pawn, we still got the 2 connected passed pawns. That's an important point actually for your own games. If you've got 2 connected passed pawns and you've got a double pawn, that's not so bad. You can always bear in mind that can be lost. You've still got the pawn connections of the 2 connected passed pawns. So knight b1. Pawn pushing again. b4. So, it's not so easy now, is it? The piece up. Knight f4. The bishop's preserved with bishop b3 because it can also be used to herd the pawns forward now, like this. Rook d6. And remember, this is a reserve pawn. Do we want to take time out to protect it? Or do we want to just push this? Well, sorry, a question from Jordan. Why not f4 and e5? Okay. A bit far on that, so we'll carry on this. So rook d6. So now, actually, the pawn wasn't protected. In fact, just c4, pushing on, using up the reserve pawn for c3. Okay. And from there, it's protected by the bishop as well. So even if white sacrificed the knight, you can still preserve a pawn on c3. So these 2 pawns, they're looking more convincing, aren't they? White's got this extra piece, but these pawns are looking quite dangerous. Knight d5 was played, offering actually a pawn sacrifice because now bishop takes is possible, and that's accepted actually. So what was White's idea with knight d5? His idea was to stretch open the bishop, maybe, but there's check. And now actually the pawns actually are kind of locking in white pieces in the defence. These 3 white pieces are in the defence of these pawns. Okay, black's piece down, but look at the king now. It would be good if actually the 7th rank could be used for an attack on the king. So that's like the next plan. The pawns actually don't have to be pushed any further. They're doing a useful job at the moment in tying down white's pieces. So rook a2. Okay, so bishop f3. White's a bit nervous now about king safety. Rook b2. What does rook b2 do? Not 100% sure. It looks like a useful move. Let's just push on. f5, which weakens a bit these 2 pawns here, because now bishop e5 is possible. Maybe Kotov was in time pressure or something. This f5 looks a bit loosening. Queen e1. And now dominating the d file, rook d8. So this rook's kind of stranded as well. How can it get back? The poor rook has no way back, it seems. There's also now a threat of c2 because there's no knight d2. Bishop e4. Maybe stopping c2 because the bishop and rook are at least stopping c2. King g7. provoking actually this move f6 check. So is that actually good for white to play f6 check? The rooks do coordinate to support f6. The king just moves back. So it looks as though the back row is a bit weak. If the rooks ever move, then rook c8. Rook a6. But now look, these dark squares are actually under pressure. There's a coordinated attack already with rook and bishop. So really h5 seems like logical, you know, to try and undermine white's king safety. It creates a square for the king as well. Rook a5, h4 plugging in the attack. And Kotov goes a bit crazy here. Well, this next move, bishop takes g6, clearly unmasks an attack on the bishop and rook. But it's ignored now, spectacularly, with a fantastic move. I wonder if you can guess it if I give you 10 seconds starting from now. If you're on ChessBase, please try and hide your move score to make these guessing games more fun. So 10 seconds starting from now. What does black play here? Okay. Black plays a rook sack. Rook takes h2 check. Devastating. So the first plan, which was dynamic, about the two passed pawns versus the piece, is accompanied by another dynamic plan, just going for the king. So that's pretty good. The two plans are connected, getting to the opponent's king with a rook sack. Bishop takes g3, winning the queen. So it wasn't really a rook sack because it's definitely winning the queen. There was nothing else. So losing the queen. King h3. And now it's safe to take the bishop. End of game. So, 40 move game, pretty neat, pretty dynamic King's Indian defense, fianchetto variation, fianchetto. Let's have a look at that again. So two dynamic plans, and this shows that the d file weakness and d6, even if you lose a piece to bishop takes c5, it's not necessarily fatal in this fianchetto line. It seems one Achilles heel of the fianchetto is this pawn, and if you lose these ones as well, you could be in big trouble, as this game shows. So all of the queenside pawns of white are about to be lost, basically. All of them wiped out. So we've got two connected passed pawns, which form the basis of the first plan. And we've got a pawn in reserve, which can be lost to gain time if needed. And time was gained, giving up c6. And now the second dynamic plan. Go for the king. Just go for the king. So rook on the 7th, and the crude h5, h4 coming up, as well as bishop e5, means that there's coordination ready for bishop and rook for h5, h4 to be very effective. So white wasted a bit of time with this stuff, because after h4, look, rook h2 is on the cards, but what else does white do? His dark squares are weak. It's a tricky position. And there's also a decoy of bishop g3, queen g3. We've got queen e4 as well. So white's under real pressure when he blundered. And he's lost now. So that was Kotov. Okay, going down together. Let's have a look at another game. So, I know we coincidentally start with King's Indian games, it seems, week after week. I don't know why that is. I do play the King's Indian myself, but it's not because I play the King's Indian. It just seems to be resulting in very interesting games, often the King's Indian defense. So, okay, Petrosian against Geller, and funny enough, this is a King's Indian game. Again, this is not intentional. I haven't intentionally picked two King's Indian games. Okay, it just happens to be another fianchetto variation, but with a difference, with bishop g5 inserted. So d5, an early d5, you know, giving black the c5 for later, you know, stuff like this possible, of course. Castle's now knight c5 immediately because it hits e4. There's time without b4 because you're hitting e4 immediately. So queen c2 defending e4, and now you play a5. So I hope you've all seen my pawn chain videos on YouTube. In the French defense, the equivalent of c5 in the French defense would have been f5. You know, if white has an advanced pawn on e5, f5. So it's like, this is what you aim for in pawn structure. A juicy knight outpost somewhere, often. So c5 is the juicy knight outpost square. There's no other square for black apart from c5 in this pawn chain. So knight d2. Now black takes the opportunity to exchange off the dark square bishops, which again reflects a kind of French defence pawn chain structure. In the French defence, you'd be playing this to get rid of the light square bishops. But here, black is keen to get rid of the dark square bishops to gain access to dark squares. Right? So he plays bishop h6, dark square campaign. Doesn't mind the dark square bishops coming off. He's weakening. He's hoping he's weakening. Actually, knight takes c5 was played, not rook takes. But he's hoping he's weakening white's dark squares more than his dark squares. Okay, so knight takes c5 though. Petrosian prefers to play with the knights. He keeps the knights on and lets the bishop stumble back. Not stumble back, knight stumble back. Lets the bishop go back immediately to bishop h6. Okay, knight d3. So we have this opportunity, it seems, a tempting opportunity to attack Petrosian, the master of prophylaxis, the master of not losing. There's an opportunity, it seems, with a dark square bishop to move this and to play f5 and f4 at some point in the future and just try and hack him. Okay, that opportunity is accepted. Knight d7, and after a3 he went for it, f5. Now many players have lost against Petrosian playing this crude way, even Spassky on the black side. Because Petrosian, he sort of is a fantastic calculator as well. It's difficult to get him like this usually. Okay, so b4, expanding on the queen side. Of course the thematic break still c5. You know, tear open the c file, get to c7. Okay, knight f6. And now a delicate little knight retreat move, knight b2, as though c5 is going to be accompanied with knight c4 to put pressure on d6. And now what do we do here? Do we play f4 or do we play f takes e? So here is a key strategic decision. You know, trusting Petrosian, you know, f4, I don't know. f4, we're weakening a bit, potentially the light squares. I don't know. Is that too slow? What Geller did was more tactical, actually. He plays f takes e4. You could argue... well, it brings immediate benefits. Of course, white is not able to capture with f takes. You know, he hasn't played f3, so it's exploiting that. Also, the queen might be a bit misplaced because of bishop f5s. So there's a few little finesses in the position which might favour f takes e4, unless you regard the queen as a good protector of e4. But here, actually, Petrosian, he doesn't even recapture. He just plays c5. You know, it's an extra pawn, but it's doubled. Okay, a takes now is played, and rook takes, and now bishop f5, exploiting maybe that queen. You know, is on c2. So there's a serious threat, it seems, of e3. So is this pawn really an extra pawn? Well, maybe it is actually, because after queen b3, it's used to sort of weaken at least white's king with e3. So the king shield, there's not too many pieces around the king over here. The pieces are all over here. The king's over here. It hasn't got too much defence. After f3, now e4. Okay. So where is white's queenside attack? Knight c4, and now e takes. It looks as though white's king is becoming quite weak here. Knight g4. So there looks to be seriously crude threats now, like queen h4, or even bishop f4. So after g3, there's also queen f6, which is now played, tying down the knight for a moment. But queen d4 might also be possible. Bishop g2 is played. And it looks like a great position for black. It looks as though, what has Petrosian done to his position? What are these knights doing over here? This queenside attack is not really an attack. Bishop d3 looks pretty nasty. There's uncovering attacks like queen f2. Petrosian's been crushed. He's been completely crushed. His king safety's gone to bits. He can't play anything to defend the king, it seems. In fact, his execution is quite swift from here. After h3, just check. And now the final move of the game. I wonder if you can guess it if I give you 10 seconds. Starting from now. Okay, Petrosian is crushed now by Geller. Geller just plays queen takes g3. So he's threatening mate. So he's kind of compelling this. If the game had continued with hg, then I guess easiest is looking like bishop f4. You know, what are these pieces doing for the king? Nothing. Nothing. It's just end of game. The king can't really run from this. So something went really badly wrong for Petrosian's defense in this game. Now let's have a look in overview and summary. Okay, I'll give you 20 seconds from now on critical moves. Sorry about that. 20 seconds from now on, okay? But let's have a look. Why did this disaster happen? It was an early King's Engine game. Maybe the King's Engine was underestimated in general. Petrosian seemed to play quite complacently somehow. Okay, this bishop h6 might have been initially annoying to lose the dark square bishops. And he went for the knights. I mean, what if he had gone for... Maybe that was better. You know, maybe it was just better to play like that. But he didn't. So the bishop was quite good. Now, I guess one thing about this is if you do play f4, this bishop is going to be bad anyway behind the pawn chain. So Fe does have the advantage. This bishop's going to be always good, at least on this diagonal. Pardon me, on that diagonal. If once you play Fe, so that supports the idea of Fe. So knight f6, and you know he didn't want to play f3. Of course, he doesn't want to play f3 because of check. This is devastating potentially because we've got knight h5 now, and queen h4, and knight g3 as threats. This bishop's quite a monster on this diagonal. He can't play f3. So he lets that pawn go, which might seem sensible. He doesn't want to give black a mass of pawns in the centre maybe as well. But it seemed as though black just got a very easy attacking position now, because all of these guys are really ready to pounce on the king, and these guys are all over on the queen side. So that's apparent now. Basically, in this position, it looks as though, you know, what's happened to white's king here after knight g4. What is he going to play here? Is he going to play h3? He's just asking for knight f2 and knight takes h3. Or even just queen h4. So that was the end of his king here after bishop d3, with the queen coming to f2. And if needed, you know, there's e2. If really needed, there's e2 to block any f2s. If that was at all needed. It just seems a crushing position. This is a dream position really for the King's Engine player, without even having to use f5, f4. Okay, so that was 1949. So let's have a look at another game. So against Sokolsky, Moscow 1950. Okay. Now I don't know about you guys, but I'm filled with a sense of great comfort nowadays. I'm realizing it now, that if someone plays the French defense and you get this winnower, I just think I've won, I think, my last 10 out of 10 winnower games. What is it about the winnower? The pawn chain is heading to the king. If black castle's kingside, he's going to be slaughtered in the winnower. I'm filled with confidence and optimism in this position, which is a reason why personally I think I'm going to stick with e4, just in case they play the French defense. So anyway, it doesn't matter about losing one or two pawns on the queen side. Yeah? And this game shows that, you know. After takes Knight e7. Get on the king side. Get all your pieces on the king side. Queen g4. Yes. Target g7. Okay. And you can just overprotect e5. It doesn't matter about losing this one, this one, and this one. You can just overprotect this one to maintain your attack. So c takes d4. You don't need to recapture. Just bishop d3. Very good. Pointing more things at the king side. Okay. Queen c7. Actually here he didn't even protect e5. This seems a bit complacent or a bit daring. White didn't even protect e5, but mind you he can't. If he plays the natural knight f3, there's queen takes c3 check, and actually losing the rook is more than an inconvenience. So actually he protects c3 here. Sorry, what is my assessment of the classical French? That's fun as well because you play bishop g5 and you can go into the Alekhine-Chattard gambit. See some recent videos on the YouTube channel. Alekhine-Chattard gambit wins. Okay, YouTube.com Kingscrusher. Okay, so queen c7. He protects c3. He lets e5 go. But actually e5 comes at a price. Actually, I think you're going to lose your queen almost, or bishop f4 looks dangerous, but there's one square. Queen f6, but then bishop g5 might be annoying, and bishop takes e7 maybe, or f4 if queen e5. I don't know, it gets a bit hair raising, but black took on c3 here. Okay, now white takes on g7, and he mops up h7 as well. Okay, he loses e5, but he's got the two bishops, and that dark square bishop is an asset that black does not have, a dark square bishop. Bishop f4. Okay, so the queen moves to f6. Pass pawn alert. This is a pass pawn. Start moving it, even in the middle game. h4. After knight b6. Actually, it supports also bishop g5, another perk. Okay, queen h6. Queen h6. What does that do? It does mean that bishop h7 might be on the cards, but then rook f8, I don't know. No, I don't think that's the main purpose of queen h6. Does anyone know? Why would you play queen h6 here? Anyone? Ah, well, bishop f6 harasses the queen. The queen can always go back, but yeah, maybe it's to do with bishop f6. Oh, sorry, bishop f4. Pardon me, bishop f4 is also on the cards. Well, yeah. Okay, we'll find out anyway. No, actually, it seems the intention was queen f6. So he doesn't mind the queens coming off, because remember, the passed pawn would be stronger if the queen's off. It's probably easier to not get mated and use the passed pawn. So rook c8, and now f4, encouraging the queens to come off. But actually black refuses. You know, if he takes the queen, the bishop's ready made for supporting the passed pawn on h8. So queen e3. And now h5, just pushing that passed pawn. Okay. e5. And it looks as though there's menacing threats on the horizon for the king here. h6. And now e4. Okay. Bishop moves. And now black gets really aggressive. Sokolsky gets really aggressive. He does an exchange sack here with rook takes g5. Blimey. Okay. Now, as Kasparov says, it's not checkers. We don't have to recapture. So that's a very important point. And also, if someone's threatening you, you don't have to listen to the threat. So being disobedient to the opponent is really important, as I've discovered recently. So what does white do here? Well, he's got the huge passed pawn as well. He's got the option, of course, of h7 to threaten immediate queening. He doesn't have to play fg. What if he did play fg? Is that really terrible out of interest? Is there a real danger here? There probably is. What does black play here? I'm not 100% sure of the refutation, but this looks really good anyway. Just playing h7. Okay, so bishop g4. The queen, he doesn't queen actually. Actually, he's got the option of queening. Instead, he just takes on g5. He keeps the queening option open. There is this nasty check which needs to be factored in. Black takes on e2 and goes for the e2 again with knight d4. Okay. Now white queens. And black here resigned, actually. I think the main point is, if the black king did move, white can play check to protect e2. And also it looks a bit vulnerable, but it is an extra queen anyway. Mind you, f5. Hang on. f5. Not so easy. Okay. So, okay, why did black resign here? What would be a good move here to defend e2? Or is there a better move? Or just bishop g4? Maybe just bishop g4 check. I think a queen can be sacrificed, you know, with queen takes e7. Or maybe not. Maybe bishop f4. Sorry, okay. Well, how do you guys refute this? After queen check, king d7, is this easily winning for white? Anyone? Possibly many moves win here. Maybe bishop b5 is good. So if knight takes, I don't know actually. I don't know. Any ideas? Bishop g4. Bishop g4. Bishop g4 before queening. I think he did play queening move. Bishop g4. Let's go back to bishop g4. f5. Alright, there's queen takes d4. Queen takes d4. Queen takes. Maybe just bishop takes f5 here. And you're a rook up. There's no attack. You're just a rook up. I think that's evidence enough, isn't it? Yeah? And the king's still going to be harassed here. So that looks like evidence enough to clear out black's attack. So let's go on to another game. Thanks, Bengo Gambit, for queen takes d4. That clears up black's attack pretty elegantly. Well, I think that's winning for white anyway. Okay. He's a rook up. So, okay, against Geller. Sorry, against Geller. Against Botvinnik. Botvinnik, he's playing black. Botvinnik, Mikhail Botvinnik. So he's playing black. Budapest 1952. Oh, sorry, we didn't do a recap. Oh, we didn't do a recap. Do you want a recap of that game? Let's do a recap of that game. Did we not? Oh dear. Okay, we're going to revise that game. Push it further into memory. Quick revision. If I can get the actual game score. Wasn't that one? It was against Sokolsky. Sokolsky. So it was a French defense winner with the idea of sacking d4 and c3. So he got a trump card of the passed h pawn from the opening, and he made use of that by this move is actually quite nifty for queen f6 then, because he wants a bishop there to support the passed pawn, and black's attack was just too slow against the passed h pawn. He didn't bother moving this or castling. He just got his h pawn to push. He just pushes the h pawn. Okay, he has to move the bishop, okay, to slow down black's attack. H pawn again. H pawn's critical now at move 21. Yeah, so this is the problem with the winner. Nigel Short was jokingly saying at a recent simultaneous where he beat me, he did this lecture about the French defence and was recalling this French defence game and said, yeah, the French defence winner, the problem with the winner is the g7 pawn, losing that. So this just shows if you lose your g7 pawn and your h7 pawn, then white clearly has a winning passed h pawn in many variations. So this is a winning h pawn. Black's attack's too slow, unfortunately. Okay, there's a dangerous looking check, and it looks dangerous again for e2, but the pawn wins. This was the move played, h8 queening. So I think, bishop g4 check, f5, queen takes d4. It's going to be winning. Bishop takes f5. We're rook up. It's a rook up. In fact, you can get the queens off. Yeah. Okay. You don't need the mate. This is just winning. It's just the rook up. It's winning. These pawns are not going anywhere. Okay. So that was the recap. Okay. So let's go on to the next game. So Botvinnik against Geller. So d4, he plays a King's Indian defense again against the fianchetto. Alright, so I miswrite. So after f5, queen takes e7 is crushing. Okay. Have you engine checked that, Elmas? Okay, that's cool. So again, why is it that the fianchetto variation against the King's Indian is all the rage in the 1950s? But it seems this is a good way of playing against the fianchetto variation. You play for the c5 square. So after castles e5, you're trying to get the c5 square. If white can play d5, you get c5. e4. So white is encouraging e takes because he's relying on pressure on d6 later. D-file pressure. So knight c5, h3, rook e8. White's refusing in this game to play f3. He plays rook e1. Now after a5, he plays queen c2. So he's further emphasizing support for e4 here against black's 1, 2, 3. Okay. So everything's about e4 at the moment. A4 is played, restraining b4 still because there's en passant, and stopping maybe knight b3. Maybe that's a key idea. Bishop e3. So we get this question coming up again and again in this line about this d6 pawn. He plays c6. It looks as though d6 isn't that weak on the semi-open file. Rook ad1. But now queen a5. Black has active pieces. a3. And then it's knight fd7 again. So again, the knight's got an option of either knight e5 to b6 or b6. c4 is a bit of a weakness. It's a bit dislocated actually because of this pawn here stopping b3s. So this pawn might be a target, c4. Bishop f1. The bishop humbly comes to protect the c4 pawn. Okay. Rook e7. So white's pawn mobility could be on the king side here. We've got 3 versus 4. So surely white can create a pass pawn in the centre, in theory. f4. Okay. Knight f6. Again, provocation maybe. Bishop f2. Bishop d7. It looks as though, isn't black just losing ground here after e5? Well, at least he's getting rid of a d6 pawn. His d6 pawn is gone. Knight e8. He's got a blockade square e6 potentially to make use of now. This e6 blockade square. Knight f3. Bishop also looks good now. Bishop f5. He restrains white from g4 by playing h4. h5. So g4's restrained. And now the blockade square is used. This pass pawn can be blockaded on e6. So knight c7. So e6 is going to be good, surely. Queen f2. Okay, putting pressure on c5. That looks like dangerous. But the blockade just in time also protects c5. Bishop e3. So black seems to have a solid position. He's frozen white's queenside pawns with this pawn here. Okay, there's a pawn here, but it's heavily blockaded. Isn't white being positionally outplayed here? White looks to be positionally outplayed. Or has he got something going? Actually, he's got knight h4, which seems to be very annoying. The bishop's stuck, it can't go out. But he's losing e5. Okay. So knight takes, queen takes. Attacking h5. Now an elegant little move, knight g7, protecting h5. Attacking the queen. Queen f2. And now an interesting decision actually to crush white's pawn structure. Bishop takes c3, doubling white's pawns and getting a big knight on e4 now with tempo. Now he wins c3 here, knight takes c3. And now a curious move here. Well, attacking the rook, as though, is there going to be a repetition? No, he plays knight e4 now. After rook e2, queen f5, offering exchange of queens. That knight's pretty useful. So white has the 2 bishops here versus the 2 knights. Black is a pawn up. So, okay, g4 was played. He's not that keen to exchange off queens. He just takes on g4. And in fact, he keeps the queens on now. He plays queen g6. Even though white's got the 2 bishops. The knights are pretty dominant here maybe, and g4 is a bit of a target. But maybe this rook could be dangerous, you know, switching somewhere, you would think. Or is it? Rook g2. Knight g5. Unveiling the pressure on e3. So if queen takes this, rook takes e3. So queen takes, rook takes e3. So this ending, without the bishop pair, this knight could come to dominate the bishop here. Knight e6. It looks like a very handy knight to have. So black's position looks a little bit better. He doesn't mind the rook and pawn ending. He doesn't mind even losing b7 here. The king would just step out maybe. And a3's under fire anyway. So g5 was played, at least restricting the king. But now rook b3. So there's only a pawn up here, but it seems to be a very nice position for black, because these 2 weaknesses as well, you know, rook e5 would attack both of them. White takes after rook d1. Actually, black just plays rook e2, cutting off the king. b2 is a serious threat. Botvinnik here seems to have... He's resigned here. So I wonder why. Let's have a quick check then. What if he played the check? Takes. Is this lost for white? Probably, because b2, you see, b2 is really nasty with the king there. If you imagine a4, then rook c2 is just threatening rook c1 now and queening. So there's no defense here, is there, in this position? So that's hopeless. If we get this position, this is hopeless for white. Would you agree? I would hope so. I hope you agree. If you've got a disagreement in that, please say now. But it looks as though this is a menacing threat, this rook c2, just to play rook c1 check and b1. Yeah? So in that case, this position is lost here after rook e2. Okay, it was a complex King's Indian game again. Let's do a review and summary of this game. Overview and summary. So the fianchetto line again. So it seems to be a proven way of playing against this variation is to play like this with knight bd7. Forget e5s and knight c6 plan. That belongs in a different variation. Against the fianchetto, knight bd7 has proven for the third time now in the games we've looked at a lot of dynamism for black. Here, by the way, you might be wondering, knight b5, there's c6 immediately actually to evict a knight. So c6 now. And black has, it seems, an active game. So even with white playing for an e5 pawn, it seems not such a big deal, this e5 pawn. It was able to be blockaded via e6. And black was able to get, well, always had in this game a very good position. This was a nice move, knight g7. And he took the option to simplify now with bishop takes c3. It really simplifies things. And he wasn't even that keen to exchange off queens. He let white do it. He just took on g4. And white with the two bishops seemed to be worse here. So more simplification, getting rid of the bishop pair. And basically a losing endgame position, it seems, in this rook and pawn ending. So this looks like a lost rook and pawn ending. It was resigned here after rook e2. Okay. So let's have a look at another game. Okay, he's got a fantastic record against Fischer, one of the only Russian Grandmasters to have a positive score versus Fischer. And he's beaten Fischer not just with black but with white as well. So e4, and Fischer played, so this is 1962, Curaçao. This might have been the candidates tournament. CT means candidates tournament, doesn't it? So round 21. Curaçao, and this was the tournament I think Fischer was accusing the Russians of just agreeing draws with each other. And I looked at the cross table, and indeed they seemed to just draw with each other and beat all the foreign players. Now, was that a coincidence? Now, if it was intentional, and this is the problem I have with Curaçao 1962, you see, from Fischer's point of view, okay, they were resting to beat up the foreign players, but on the other hand, you know, Smyslov qualified, Geller didn't. If he had, you know, tried to win every game, would he have won this candidates tournament? Would he have come below Smyslov if he wasn't agreeing draws with the other Russian players. Sorry, you're saying Curacao? I thought it was Curaçao. Curacao? I'm sorry. Okay, let's just call it Curaçao, yeah? So the key question, would you know, without the agreed draws, if that was really true, would Geller have come ahead of Petrosian? That's interesting, I think. So, Sicilian defence. And we have Najdorf. Okay, so bishop e2. Positional. None of this castling queenside business. And Fischer doesn't play, you know, Scheveningen style, Scheveningen pawns. Instead, e5. So after knight b3, bishop e7. Okay, black's got a slight issue with d5. Both sides castle. Bishop e3. Now queen c7 was played here. Now, actually, a quick question. You might think, well, why not b5 immediately? Sorry, this is probably a silly question. Is there a reason why b5 is not played immediately? Does anyone know? And maybe there's a useful undermining, a4. You know, if b4, knight d5, that looks dangerous. A bit weak. You know, if knight takes, you've got knight takes, queen takes, you've got queen d5. So maybe a4, you know, if b5, a4. Okay? So he plays queen c7. a4 now, which seems to restrain black from b5. Okay. Bishop e6. And now further restraint with a5. Marking the b6 square. That can be covered. So white plays, oh, this is fantastic, I have to say, because I played through this earlier. I've got to say it's fantastic, because as white, you're annoyed now, aren't you, that what black has covered, the seemingly, you know, the weakness of the position has seemingly been covered by black. Okay, so this is a sort of annoying position, because in principle you don't want to play knight d5, do you? Because you're covering up black's hole. If you play knight d5 and black takes with a piece, you're covering the d5 hole. But actually you get a very, very important asset once you play knight d5. Okay, so he does play knight d5, and I'm going to ask you what asset you think white gets here. In this position, how do you assess this position? What is white's strategic asset here? Does anyone know? It's not a variation, just verbalise it. What is the strategic long-term asset here that white has in this position? Anyone? Well, you're weakening your king, Banco Gambit. That's you know, you don't want to weaken your king with moves like g4 if your king's on the king side, in principle. Black can always emphasise your king if you know, sacrificing something. Someone says c4, that's a move, but what have you got? What asset have you got here as white? What is the strategic asset of white here? Anyone? In terms of pawn structure, I'll tell you. I'm going to tell you, okay? No, there isn't a weak pawn on d6. Come off it. You've just covered the pawn on d6 with your own pawn. No, come off it. You've got a pawn majority. Look, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. You've got a pawn majority. Okay? And this is amazing demonstration of how to use this pawn majority. So c4 first of all. Okay. Now you think, well, black's going to counter, surely. Yeah, maybe. It takes time. Rook c1. So immediately threatening c5 now, potentially. So Fischer blockades that, knight c5. But now he gives white a passed d pawn, potentially. So really you want to unblockade this d pawn, right? And potentially you've also got a backward pawn on the semi-open file here. Well, imagine if that pawn wasn't there. This would be a semi-open file and a backward pawn. But what lifts the blockade tactically here is a beautiful move in this position. Okay, b4. You want to lift this blockade here. You want to get these two connected passed pawns in the centre going. Rook ac8. Queen b3, putting on the firing line not just the diagonal against f5s, but also b7. Bishop d6. Now rook fd1. As though this d pawn is going to be useful, you know, after takes, maybe d6 at some point. Queen e7. And he starts lifting the blockade. B takes. Starts lifting the blockade. Bishop takes. So d6 is now on the cards clearly. But actually he takes time out. And this is a really odd move, you might think. He does take time out. Okay. With this next move. Just protecting the pawn, actually. He just protects the pawn with rook a1. He's maintaining threats like queen b6, d6. They're maintained. But not only that, hang on. There's an absolutely fantastic idea of rook a1, which is revealed now. It's not just to protect the pawn. I lied. Sorry. That was a lie. Or rather, I forgot really the main point of rook a1. Can you guess this next move if I give you 10 seconds? d6 is out of the question, right? But this pawn is backward on the semi-open file. So the clue is, how do you intensify pressure on the poor b7 pawn? Okay, so I'll give you 20 seconds starting from now. What is the next move that white plays here? Okay, I think that was about 20 seconds. Rook a4, amazing, amazing. He's creating a battery from his queen. A battery of pressure on b7. Black's going to start falling apart now. Fischer plays bishop f5. He's starting to fall apart after rook b4. He protects with bishop c8. But now rook b6 as well supports d6. That rook is amazing on b6. Okay, and now even more pressure now on the blockades on d6 and c5 with the queen b4 move. Okay, queen c7 supporting c5. He takes on d6 and he piles on the pressure again with rook b1. Okay. So it looks as though, hang on, okay, is queen b6 the idea? After queen c7, no, queen b6 is not the idea. Queen a4 parries a5 because we've got this threat now. It needs to be dealt with. So bishop d7. And actually, tactically, he doesn't mind losing the a5 pawn. He plays queen a3 here. And there's an immediate threat of rook takes b7, takes queen takes c5, which would leave two connected passed pawns. Yeah? So actually queen a3 is to do with these two passed pawns. What does Fischer do here against rook takes b7? Now one could argue, well, maybe he could have just retreated his bishop back. Maybe. Is that possible? There might be d6 here, you know, because takes rook d1, back row issue. Mind you, there's queen f8. It's not this, is it? There's queen f8. So is bishop c8 possible? Does anyone see any flaw with bishop c8? That wasn't played. So Fischer, he didn't seem to mind this combination. He plays rook takes a5. So rook takes b7. And we've got the two connected passed pawns now. These are really dangerous now. They're much more difficult to blockade. Imus says rook b6 after bishop c8. Alright, let's have a quick look at that. So we're saying in this position, we're saying bishop c8. You're saying rook b6. That does cover a5. Yes, d6 is a threat for queen takes c5. The rook is a prisoner. The rook is in trouble here, isn't it? Oh dear. Fantastic, Imus. I must give you points for that. This is winning, isn't it, this position? Does everyone agree? This will be winning for white. What does black do here? Fischer was forced into his continuation. Everyone agree? You want to try and exchange sacrifice. Benko Gambit. Okay, how do we deal with this exchange sacrifice? Is it a big deal? Actually, c1 is covered here. Can we not just play d6? No? Then you just make some air for your king, and then you carry on and you the exchange up. I'm sure it's winning the exchange up here. I'd take white. Because what you do after, you know, you say queen d4, I'll play h3. And then later you got queen c1 as chess base indicates, and you're on c7 and you just play queen c7. And then rook takes b7 takes, and you just play d7, you queenless pawn. That would be a plan. Okay? So you can't play the exchange down. So anyway, Fischer, he went in for this position. He played rook takes a5. So there's two connected passed pawns in the centre. He makes some space for the king. h3. Check. Okay, now we want to drive these pawns forward. So queen c3. So getting ready to drive the pawns forward. Bishop f3. Fischer plays now, well, check is adequately answered with g3. So he plays this. It looks desperately lost here. And now in this position, actually, he didn't play c5 immediately. He makes time for g4 to attack that bishop. And now he plays c5. And these pawns are just winning. c6. And actually with this move Fischer resigned. It seems in this final position with Fischer resigning, I would say d6 looks clearly winning. Because, you know, say black, you know, sacrifices the bishop. We've got bishop d5, haven't we? Or hang on, is this pawn dangerous? This pawn and this one. What do we play here? Let's rewind. Fischer resigned with king f8. Is d6 the winning move? Does everyone agree? d6? Or was there something better? Oh, bishop d1 holds. Of course, thank you. Benko Gambit, bishop d1 holds. Yes, bishop d1. You hold up a4 and you blockade d4 and you just get your king in after. Okay. That's winning, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So, as I say, I thought that was a masterpiece, because if we review this game, it looks as though this is what you don't want to do usually, is to put a pawn on d5. But there were some beautiful rook manoeuvres in this game. which meant that this advantage of the 4-3 pawn majority is a really cool advantage to have. So all of these moves seem quite thematic, really. b4, lifting the blockade, and I think one of the most interesting moves of the game was rook a1. It's a quiet killer, rook a1. This bishop's holding up c4, so you just play like this and you put pressure on b7. Once you get pressure on b7, it started to go a bit, it's really passive for black anyway. And now it becomes critical. This rook's almost trapped by the queen. And there's rook takes b7 as a threat. It just goes basically into a lost ending with these two connected passed pawns. It's a lost ending after all that. So the asset from the opening just went into the ending as a winning ending advantage, you could argue. Okay. Was that convincing? Shall we have a look at another game? One more? Okay. Oh, wrong game score. Hold on. Kotov versus Kotov. Kramer versus Kramer. Geller versus Spassky. So how did he beat Spassky up in the Sicilian defense? 1964. Spartakad. Moscow. So e4 c5. Okay. Open Sicilian again. A more flexible pawn structure chosen by Boris. e6. Forget this e5 stuff. After bishop e2 again. Bishop e7. Actually, more aggression now is afforded in this system. f4. Both sides castle. Knight c6. Okay, white supports d4. Now black plays e5. Okay, Boris is slightly weakening d5 like any other game, but he doesn't also mind playing a5 here. Now surely a4 really marks out b5. It's really marked out this square now. Surely, is that a weakness for black? Knight b4. Maybe black is trying to get counterplay with d5 or just the c file pressure. King h1, queen c7. Now a mysterious rook move, it seems. Rook c1. It actually means maybe this knight is free to move without c2 being vulnerable. Okay, so bishop e6. Also, of course, knight takes c2. If rook takes, there was bishop takes b3. Okay, so knight moves out of that, just in case. E takes. Okay, Geller plays knight b5, kicking the queen. Bishop takes f4. After knight c6. It's not a pawn chain game, this one. Queen e1. This queen is leaning towards the king side. Maybe over here. Maybe on d6 from g3. Battery over there. d5. Okay. Rook moves now to d1. A new roll facing the queen. Discouraging d takes e4. So queen b6. Okay, white takes on d5 and attacks the queen again. Now the bishop, he doesn't want to lose his dark square bishop. He retreats it all the way back to c1. And actually, the bishop coming back to c1 means b3, bishop b2 would point at the black king. And he's got that on the cards as well. So potentially this is an active retreat, an aggressive retreat. After knight f6, he does play b3, and that supports, of course, the knight on c4 as well. And he's also got another diagonal. This one, bishop a3. A couple of rooks come off. Queen g5. He takes off the dark square bishops. A Zwischenzug move, just threatening mate. Okay. Bishop f3. Which seems to protect e7. So Boris is relying on this pin now to get his piece back. So he's temporarily, black is temporarily a piece down. Okay. So white now attacks the queen. And attacks the queen again. Actually, to be honest with you, compared to the other game, I don't like this game at all. I don't even know why I'm showing you this game. It was featured on Wiki. I prefer the previous game from a strategic point of view. There seems to be threats and Zwischenzugs and threats, and it seems to be chaotic. There's nothing about the pawn structure in this game dictating the course of events. I don't know what you guys think. It just seems to be a chaotic game so far. So white's temporarily a piece up. It's not really that memorable, I would say. So somehow tactically, he's kept onto his piece. I think the reason this was featured on Wiki, actually, is because it was Boris Spassky, and beating Spassky is beating one of the world champions. It's not because the game's that instructive, I think. Although, of course, it's technically interesting to see how you can still be a piece up here. So knight takes e5, queen takes, and he's still a piece up. Great. Okay. So he's a piece up. Bishop takes f3. And, okay, he plays g takes f3 instead of rook takes f3. And now, of course, he's got the threat of rook g1 and queen takes f6 potentially. And here, Boris resigned. Boris is a piece, down, clearly. And if I don't know, what does black do here? What does black do? If knight d7, you've got queen d6 if you want it. And the bishop's actually protecting h4, and then there's rook g1 on the cards. Not a particularly memorable game for me. I don't know about you guys. I think I shouldn't have shown you this one. It's just because I think it was because of Spassky. It raised the game status, but it seemed to be chaotic and tactical. We could do an overview and summary. Maybe there's something of great importance about it as well, which I've missed. So where did it go wrong for Spassky? Did he play overactively on the queen side? He did lose control of b5 early on. He seemed to have, visually some counterplay. Visually he's got some active pieces here. And he gets rid of his d6 weakness pretty soon with d5. Okay, he doesn't dare play d4 because then we'd see knight c4 and this pawn would be really weak. So he keeps things sort of active. Okay, black, he removed all his structural weaknesses and he seems to have active pieces. So black has got no major structural weaknesses, except b5 seems to be a major asset for white. This b5 control. And the queen is harassable. Knight c4, harassing the queen. Okay, so this retreat is not just about b3 and bishop b2. Actually, it's about b3 and bishop a3 to further harass the queen on this diagonal. So it's 2 for the price of 1, this retreat. So b3, I don't know where the queen goes. Actually, it hasn't got many squares. It can't go over here because there's this one. Where does this queen go anyway? Can't go back to a7. Can't go to b6. Can't go to d6. The queen's actually sort of, maybe this is the thing about this game. This queen actually hasn't got many squares to go, actually. These knights kind of grip the position. Maybe this is the key point about this game. Where does the queen go? There's no safe haven for it. So bishop a3 is a really nasty threat. So rook fd8, bishop a3. Takes off. Okay, it finds g5, which was the weakness of the last move. That g5 was the only square. Now we get this bishop takes e7. So the key question here, why couldn't black have just recaptured then? Knight takes e7. Maybe, I don't know, maybe knight c7 is on the rook and it's on e6. As bishop takes c4, maybe that's not the move. White to play here. Is there anything important about this position? Why couldn't black have just recaptured? Anyone? Actually, knight c7 is strong, isn't it? If bishop takes c4, all you do here is take, and you're on e7, and you're on the rook, aren't you? What does black do here? e7 and a8 are loose. So maybe this is why Spassky had to play something as Zwischenzug. He didn't recapture, he played this Zwischenzug, going a piece down to threaten mate. But it wasn't that easy to get the piece back. He plays bishop d5. So he's a piece down. And it seems the queen's harassed, put onto a terrible square. There's no other. Is there any other squares? You can't go there because of bishop takes d5 and the attack on the queen. So knight e5. But what about h6? In this position, didn't the queen have h6? I think here what would you play here? Interesting. Knight d6. You play knight d6. But then rook takes e7. Does it make a difference which knight? Knight cd6, you just play rook takes e7. Hang on a sec. There's knight f5 here. Knight f5, hang on. So you're right. Look, this knight f5 is quite crushing, isn't it? Yeah? I agree. Knight d6 looks strong because of knight f5. Yes? Okay, so maybe, you know, he goes to g6 because of that reason. So after knight e5, it's very unpleasant. He's a piece down. He resigns. Okay, a tactical game, that one, in contrast to the previous one. I did have one extra game, if you really want. Should we go over one last game against Smyslov or not? Who wants to go over one last game then? Okay. One last game then. Okay. against Smyslov in Moscow 1965. So this is him beating all the world champions up, isn't it? Okay, so d4, knight f6, we have g6, and we have the Grunfeld, an early Grunfeld in 1965. C takes, sort of classical variation of the Grunfeld. Bishop c4, we see this in the Karpov-Kasparov matches later a lot. So c5, knight e2, this is a favourite of Karpov as well. So Karpov and Smyslov seem to share each other's openings quite a bit. After castles, knight c6. This was endlessly played in Karpov-Kasparov, this position. Bishop e3. Queen c7. Rook c1. All theory. Rook d8. All theory, probably. So this next move looks a bit adventurous, though. This next move, f4, seems to invite, a nasty pin with bishop g4, which would seem, about d4. But actually, black doesn't play bishop g4. Black plays e6, but it looks a bit passive, actually. All right, should we test the water here? What would you play if bishop g4? Is there a refutation of bishop g4? Or is that just theory? I wonder if you can get away with queen b3 actually in this position. No, actually just takes. Anyone? Is it just theory, maybe? What about just d5 actually? d5. So d4 is okay. You can just play d5. So maybe this idea, okay. So he plays e6, seems a bit passive, king h1, and b6. And it allows this breakthrough on the king side, f5. So he's breaking up the king side. Knight a5, bishop goes back. And this looks like how Spassky beat Fischer, actually. That game where Fischer lost in a Grunfeld with f5. Do you guys know that? That was another classic for Fischer losing to Spassky before the 1972 match. So this quick f5 is dangerous. After e takes, we have some king safety issue here. Bishop b7, queen d2. Clearly he's going to exchange off, weaken black's king further. Rook e8. So knight g3, queen c6 on g2, threatening, of course, something like rook takes e3 now for a decoy. Rook f2, rook a d8. So is there enough pressure on d4 to compensate for the king safety aspects? Bishop h6, doesn't mind about losing d4. He wants to get at the black king. Okay. Bishop h8. And again, he doesn't mind about d4. He plays queen f4. Actually, you're in for a real treat here. A really delightful treat. Yes, I have played through this game earlier and I was delighted myself. So this is a fantastic final treat, this game, actually. So it looks as though white's centre is collapsing. And often when you play a white against Grunfeld, it's like you're nannying your pawn centre, and where is the compensation for having to look after your pawn centre? But here, there's pretty clear that there's threats of fg and queen f7 mating. So rook d7, and now we have the move knight e4, and you might think, well, what's going on here? What about c takes d? There might be... I think we need to examine that. In the game c4 was played, how does c takes d lose? Does anyone know? C takes d. Does this move lose? Maybe c takes d and you're attacking the queen, if nothing else. Okay, so maybe that's not a big deal. So actually black released the tension in the centre. The bishop did go back. And look at black's position. We've got this silly knight on a5. Not really participating in king safety. Okay. Rook d e7. Alright, there's a focal point for black. And white ignores that new focal point in the centre by playing rook c f1. Wow. And this is where it becomes fantastic, this game. Because, okay, clearly e4 is under great fire here. But we have got f-file pressure and this bishop cutting across. So rook takes e4 would seem to be winning material. But guess what white plays here? If I give you 20 seconds to think about this position, what does white play here in this position, starting from now? Okay, this is where it gets great fun. White leaves the queen and pre, f takes g. And it's not because of g takes. If takes, we've got another one. We've got another juicy one here. We've got g takes. That would be mate. Whoops. The old bishop on the diagonal. So, black plays f6. And now it gets really crazy. It really does get crazy now. What does white play here if I give you another 20 seconds, starting from now? Okay? Anyone? Okay. I'll show you. So queen g5. Wow. Queen g5. So clearly threatening g takes. And you might be wondering, well, you know, what if takes? Then there's rook f8 mating. So queen g5. Queen is immune. Queen d7 is played. And I don't get the next move at all. I'm not sure I should even test you. I just don't understand. I think there's something about the back row being slightly weak. But white takes time now just to play the move king g1. Believe it or not. Just king g1. So I'm not 100% sure what the reason of king g1 is, or it was so after bishop g7 now, rook takes f6. Sorry, okay, the question here, okay, instead of king g1, you say g takes. I would say maybe in this position, what about king? I think king f7 is out of the question because of rook f6. King takes. Maybe black's okay just about. Okay. So anyway, he plays that king g1, mysterious move. And bishop g7 was played. So now we have rook takes f6. Rook g4. And now g takes h7. And now bishop takes g7. And now the final move of the game, a real crusher. So I wonder if you can spot the final move of the game if I give you 20 seconds here, starting from now. Okay. Final move. Queen takes g4. Okay, that's winning now because of rook f8. Gonna be like queening. Okay, so that was a Grunfeld hack attack. Let's quickly review, overview and summary. Grunfeld hack attack game. How to hack the Grunfeld. So you go for the f4, f5 stuff, and not worry too much about the center collapsing. So because the f-file pressure should come to the rescue, like in this game. So you need some good tactics though to get to the black king. Queen g6, maybe queen f7. So f6 was played instead, but then carries on tactically, queen g5. So we have this strange move, king g1. Don't know, mystery move. I think it's something to do with the back row weakness. So bishop g7, giving black an extra move to do something. He just does bishop g7. And now the attack continues, culminating in queen takes g4. Winning. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this week. So that was quite a good session. 7 games there I think we covered. Hope you got something from 1 or 2 of them. Did you? Anyone? Yeah. Comments or questions on YouTube. I'll put this on YouTube later. So youtube.com Kingscrusher. So thanks very much. Okay, I'm going to stop the live stream now, etc. Okay. And Happy New Year. Thanks very much.